Sandra. Okay, Barbara, do we have any visitors this morning?
No visitors this morning, but I was just going to make a quick announcement. This is the semi-annual time that St. Helens makes kolaches. A lot of you in the class buy them, order them. So I do have some kolache form, or just as a reminder that they are available. They'll be doing their bake for their fall festival at the end of September.
All right. Okay, we don't have any birthdays today, and we don't have any anniversaries. That's for this week.
Oh.
Where's the mic?
No birthdays. We do have.
Where's the mic?
Yes.
They're locked in there.
Yes, I assume you may be our teacher.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay.
He's our speaker. Okay, Lucille says the Caring Place did pretty well last week. They got $440 in cash and 17 pounds of food.
They were glad to see me.
Let's see. Mrs. Freeman, you're about due to get rid of that arm thing, aren't you?
I talk to the doctor tomorrow.
Okay. I'll bet you're going to be glad to get that
It's
off.
6 weeks, so I'm hoping it goes away.
Yeah, I'll bet. You got any joys or concerns this morning?
Yeah, I have something I think would come under a joy. I want to thank every one of you who signed that. He's not part of this, thank you. Who signed that refreshment list last Sunday. We got every name all the way through to the last 2 Sundays of the year. Now, we have those 2 Sundays, the 23rd and the 30th left and vacant. And the good thing about those Sundays, if any of you are feeling some guilt or have a real fear of hell, these are Sundays to sign up because they're buy one, get one free. And if you have had some concern about your husband, as some have said, and he may not make the cut to heaven, then this is the time to buy the ticket. So the 23rd, the 30th, still free. But thank you so much for all that you signed last week.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
What a sales pitch.
You know, one thing I'd like to say is special thanks to the people yesterday that participated in the reception for Ann Weiss. I know a lot of people in the class here do it on a kind of a regular basis, but especially thank you for doing it. We appreciate it.
Well, we thank everybody for bringing food.
Yep. And you know who organizes all that kind of stuff.
She does good.
Ms. Boyer over there.
That's that little lady.
Okay, I know whatever. You're the one's going to pray out loud this morning, aren't you? Yes, you are. And then we have a special guest this morning, Scott Fennell, and he's going to talk about a couple of subjects. So I'll let him carry on with it. And you'll be on as soon as she finishes with her praying out loud.
Kindness, and this group is such a giving group in this church, is the most contagious of all human attributes. It still pervades this planet Earth. Although some try to stamp it out or ignore its presence, kindness lives. It lives in the smile of a stranger's face, in an expected lift from a friend who sees your needs. Kindness holds the balm to heal the wounds of disrupt or broken promises. Kindness smooths the hurts of inadvertent slights, withstands of deliberate cuts by projecting inner warmth outward in radiant ripples. Each of us has an inbred, unlimited supply of stored kindness. Only we can act to pour forth its release. Live a little, show your kindness, help others see that kindness lives. And this was written by a geologist in Houston.
It's a real privilege this morning for me to introduce to you Scott Fennell. He is a member of our church, very active. Just a little bit of information about Scott. He graduated with his BA and MA at Baylor University in religion. Then he graduated with an MBA at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, and then a PhD, University of Texas in Arlington. Scott's been very active in various works with children and families. He worked at the Work Center for Youth in Waco, Dallas County Community Corrections, Methodist Children's Home, and he said that he knew Reverend Tom very well, and also at Cal Farley's Boys Ranch, and then he finished up his career in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Also, he has done numerous publications, and he's very active in marathoning and motorcycle touring marathons. He's run a marathon in all 50 states. He and his wife just recently got back from a 7,500 mile motorcycle trip up to Montreal, Nova Scotia, and back to Georgetown. So it's a real privilege for me to introduce to you. And also, Scott is president of the United Methodist Men's this year. Scott.
Good morning. How are we? Good.
Good.
I didn't realize there was going to be an AV test this morning, so I would have prepared differently. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Good. Thanks for that introduction. That just goes to show that you can make anything look good on paper. I am Scott Fennell, and when Ken asked me to teach for him this Sunday, or asked me if I would be willing to fill in from time to time, I said I'd be happy to do that. You know, just let me know what you're teaching, and I'll pick up where you are. And he said, well, just go ahead and teach whatever you want. And let me tell you, that makes it a whole lot harder to know what to do. Now, I'm a member of the Discovery class about 3 stories up from here. Stephen Benole is my Sunday school teacher, and for the past few weeks, we have been looking at a film series by Philip Yancey on the Jesus I Never Knew. And what he does in this, I don't know, have you seen this film series before? Some of you maybe? Anyway, Yancey has taken these film clips of how Jesus is portrayed in all these different movies, back from the silent movies up into more modern movies. And then there's always this lesson in there about, in your mind's eye, did you see Jesus acting this way? Was that the way that you really understood him to be? Well, a couple of weeks ago, we were going through this one of these particular lessons, and we hit on one of the parables. And ever since then, this parable has just been rolling around in my mind. And so when Ken failed to give me good instructions, I just decided that maybe I would share with you a little bit about this parable. Now, it's not a big secret. Everybody has read this parable. In fact, it might be one of the most well-known of Jesus' teachings. It comes from Luke 15. It is often called the parable of the prodigal son, but it's really the parable of the loving father. And what I want to admit to you that I use this parable and this particular teaching to remind myself and to go ahead and admit to you, I don't know a single thing. Not a single thing. In fact, here's a confession. Here's another confession. I was raised Baptist. And, yeah, I know. It's hard to get over it. I've been trying to get over it for 25 years. In fact, Jim introduced me as being a friend. I knew Tom Strother well. He was really one of my very best friends. And in fact, I'm Methodist because of Tom. I worked at the Methodist Children's Home for 10 years, from 1986 to 1996. And one of the things that I got to do there, as well as work with children, which is what we did every day, is we got to go out to Methodist churches and talk to people. And so it was during this time that I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in a lot of different Methodist churches, and it made me understand that this is really where I should have been all along. Well, anyway, back to my story about my confession about being Baptist. I was at the seminary at Southern Baptist Theological in Louisville back in the early 80s. I'd finished my classwork on my master's degree at Baylor, and Ken wanted to emphasize that you still have a Baylor grad up here. Anyway, I'd finished my classwork, but I was really struggling with getting the thesis written. I knew what topic I wanted to write on, but just couldn't make it all come together. And part of it was what was going on in the religion department at that time. Dr. Ray Summers had been the chair of the department for, 20 plus years, and he had been my major advisor. And the year that I finished my classwork, he retired. How dare him? Anyway, so he left me hanging. And so I didn't have anybody to help me push through this thesis, and I struggled with trying to find a chair. Well, anyway, while I was up at Southern Seminary, I had an opportunity to have a professor, Edward Schweitzer. And the only reason that I graduated with that master's degree was because of Dr. Schweitzer. He was a visiting professor that had come over from the University of Zurich in Switzerland, and had helped me understand how to frame my particular topic. Well, one day, and he was over there teaching on the Gospel of Luke, and that was my major topic, so most of the time when I'm looking for something to teach on, I always go back to Luke. Anyway, he taught one day, one of our classes, on the story of the prodigal son. And these classes were 3 hours. And he taught for 3 hours on that parable. And I thought, wow, I don't know anything. And then he came back, these classes met twice a week, he came back later in that week and taught another 3 hours on the same parable and did not repeat a single thing. And then he came back a week later and did it all again. I don't know anything. But even a blind squirrel can find an acorn, and there are so many acorns in this particular parable that I hope that we can pick up on some of those today. Now, if you want to follow along, you can, but you know this story. It's not like it's one that you haven't heard before, so maybe just listen. Just listen. I'm going to start off with the context. It begins in Luke 15, verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were drawing all near to hear him, and the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So basically, what is happening, Luke has put this story in the context of crowds are coming to Jesus, but they are the lesser than crowds. They are the people that the religious people don't normally associate with. And so there was this attitude amongst the people that were watching him, especially those in the synagogue and the temple, that this is not attracting the type of people that we want to attract. It's something we have to face in the church today, isn't it? That are we really open? Or is our gospel open to everybody? Ron preached about it this morning, talking about what is just within a mile radius of our church here. And are we really open to meeting the needs of those people? So it's in this context that Jesus delivers these 3 parables, or at least Luke puts them in this context for us to know. So I'm talking about the prodigal son. Let's jump down to verse 11. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. Well, let's stop for a minute and think about that. He's told 2 other parables. The first parable is the guy that lost a sheep. Now, he had 100 and he lost 1. Now, my math skills aren't the best, but that's like 1%, isn't it? Now, if you have 100 sheep and you lose 1, let's just say that sheep was lost. What if it had fallen off a cliff and just died? What if it was lost forever? How much would that really impact you if you lost 1% of what you had? Could most of us live with losing 1%? We probably could, couldn't we? But the point of the story is that 1 was lost and all of this man's attention went to find it. Then we have the next parable. This time not a man, but a woman who has 10 coins and 1 is lost. So we've gone from 100, 1 lost, to now 10 and 1 lost. And what does she do? Well, I mean, if you have only 10 coins and you lose 1, then that's 10%. Now we're starting to get serious here, right? You know, we've gone from 1% to 10%. But what does she do? She scours the house until she finds that missing coin. But now we have a man with 2 sons. Now this is a lot more serious, isn't it? So we're talking about from 100 to 10 to 2. He has 2 sons. And the younger of them said, "Father, give me the share of property that falls to me." And he divided his living between them. Now, do anybody have kids? Yeah, I got kids. You know, I mean, you know, how would you feel if one of your children said, "Give me my inheritance now"? Would it be strange? Would you be all keen about that? You know, I mean, it was just as strange back then. I mean, it would be strange to us today. It would be strange to them back then. And basically, it's not so much about the inheritance, but it's the fact that the young man says, "Dad, I'm going to treat you as if you were dead." Right? You're going to be dead. I mean, when you're dead, it's going to, you know, that part's going to come to me. Now, he was the younger son, so he wouldn't get the bulk. He'd only get 1/3. But evidently 1/3 was enough to get him going. So right now we know, and this is not really a secret, there's another brother too, right? So we're talking about this lost son, this prodigal son. But unlike the sheep, or the 99 that weren't lost, and unlike the 9 coins that weren't lost, in this parable, we've got 2 sons, and guess what? They're both lost. Aren't they? Aren't they both lost? So the younger son says, "Dad, I want to treat you as if you're dead. Give me that share of the inheritance that is mine." And then what happens? "And not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, and he took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in that country, and he began to be in want. So he went and he joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything." So here we have a man that won the lottery, basically, right? I mean, he gets all of this money in this windfall because his dad was willing to let him have it. And what does he do? He says, first of all, I want to go away far enough. Now, I don't know if you've been to the Holy Land or not, but, you know, 2,000 years ago, 100 miles would be a long way. It'd be a long, long way. So I don't know, maybe he went 50 miles, maybe he went 20 miles. However far he went, it was a far country. At least it was far enough away from his dad that he was out from under his influence. And guess what? It's kind of like retirement. if you don't have any coming in and it's all going out, at some point it runs out, doesn't it? Kind of have to worry about that. You know, I've been a lot more mindful about that kind of mindset recently. So anyway, so he gets out there and he squanders it all. Now, we don't know what he did. We know what his older brother said he did, but we don't know what he did. But he wasn't very wise in the way he was spending this money, and at one point it was gone. And not only was it gone, it was so gone that he had to take a job with pigs. Now, what would be the very worst job we might have to take?
Garbage collector.
Garbage collector?
No.
A McDonald's? I mean, you know, whatever it would be for a Jewish boy to work with pigs, that would be worse. And think about it. Have you ever been poor? Now I was raised in a blue-collar family. But my dad tells the story, and of course I don't remember this, I wasn't there, but my grandparents, that I knew very well, when they first got married, lived in a dugout in Muleshoe. You know what a dugout is? It's a hole in the ground. For goodness sakes, it's a hole in the ground. That's poor. That is poor. Muleshoe. Yeah, I mean, if you've been to Muleshoe, there's nothing out there now. And 100 years ago, there wasn't anything out there then either. They were dirt farmers, you know, and they were just, you know, completely dependent on the rain. Well, you know, I've never been quite that poor. Now, when I was in seminary, I felt like I was that poor. I pastored a little church long enough for me to know that I was not meant to be a pastor. And I had to drive 50 miles from outside of town into where the seminary was. I was making $600 a month, a car payment of $150, and I had an infant daughter. Well, let me tell you, $600 doesn't go very far. But you know, even with that, you know, I always knew that if I called home, I could get a check for 20 bucks, and let me tell you, that would have been like finding gold on the ground back then. So even at that point, having to be so desperate that you would have to lower yourself to go work with pigs, I can't imagine that. But that's how poor he was. Luke tells us, just about 10 chapters before, blessed are the poor. Not the poor in spirit. Matthew says the poor in spirit. Luke says, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Well, let me tell you, if you're poor, if you're really poor, then you know what dependence on God really is, don't you? Because who else do you depend on? Well, this young man was that poor. And he decides at that point that he ought to do something about his state. And this is what he says. So when he came to himself, when he realized the state that he was in, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to eat and to spare? And I perish here with hunger. I will rise up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him, had compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to the servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. For this is my son that was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. Let us make merry. So here he is. He realizes the state that he is in. And he says he's going to go back to his father. But then what does he do? He gets up. My wife is super interested in World War II. Her uncle of course this is back before we were born, was killed on the Arizona. He was 19 years old. In fact, we've got a picture hanging in our back bedroom that was taken of him 2 months before Pearl Harbor. And of course, being on the Arizona, he was one of the first casualties of World War II. And so she's really, interested in this, type of history. And so one of the things that we are always thinking about is, what was it been like at that particular time when you have to do something, when something requires a call to action, and how many times do you not take that action? And yet, this young man saw to himself that he is in this state and he needed to take action, and he got up and he went. And he went. Now, the Bible tells us, Jesus tells this story, that the Father sees him at a great distance away. And he gets up and he runs to him. Well, as Jim said, I'm a runner. I started running in the seminary. Gained 35 pounds. That's why I started running. I could see myself at a heart attack at 65 if I didn't do something about it. Started running in seminary, lost about 35 pounds. And so as soon as Sunday school's over, I'm going to go home and run. I already got my running clothes laid out. But let me tell you, Jewish men didn't run back then. That was not dignified. And so he sees his son from a great distance and he starts running to him. And even as the son is making this confession, what is the father doing? He is preparing his feast. Because he's been looking for this son as diligently as that shepherd had been looking for that sheep and that woman had been looking for this coin. He had been looking for his son, waiting for him to return. And he did. And it's time to make merry. Now, if we look at all three parables together, Luke could have stopped that parable here. Because when the sheep is found, they rejoice. They have a party. When the coin is found, they rejoice. They have a party. Now the younger son has been found, and they rejoice, and they have a party. It's been a perfect place to stop, right? But there was another son. I went to UTA to get my degree in social work. I was working in the Methodist home when I did that, Bishop was our bishop, back then, and Dr. Daniels actually was very gracious to allow me to go to school. So one day a week I would drive up to UTA, spend it's 100 miles up there, and drive home and all that stuff. Did that for 4 years. As a social worker, I was always interested in social policy. And so one of the things that my old professor used to say is whenever you're thinking about social policy, if you'll think about the two extremes, and you map out what the two extremes are, then somewhere in the middle of the two extremes is the answer you're looking for. Let me just give you an example, without getting anybody's dander up. There's been a discussion about gun control in our country, right? Did you hear that on the news maybe one time? It's come up a time or two. Okay, think about gun control in these two extremes. If you think about gun control, you could say, there's no guns. We're going to take every gun, we're going to melt them down, there'll be no guns. The other extreme is everybody's got a gun. We're going to give you a gun, and you're going to take it, and you're going to be happy about it, right? Well, if we think about those two extremes, these are the two extremes. Somewhere in between there is the answer that we're looking for, right? Maybe on this end, it may be on this end, but chances are it's going to be in here somewhere. We got two sons. And basically what Jesus is showing us is that all of humanity falls in between these two sons. And we say, we're not like the younger son. Oh, we would never do that. How dare he do that? But the older son's just as lost as the younger son. So basically in this parable, Jesus is confronting us all with what our relationship is with our Father, and letting us know that our Father is coming for us. And so what we do read in the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, is that there's an older brother out in the fields, and he hears them making merry, and he asks a servant, what's going on? And the servant says, your brother that was lost has come back, and we've killed the fatted calf. And when the father comes out, because the brother refuses to come in, what does the brother say? Your son, not my brother, your son has done all this, squandered your wealth, and you're making this party for him, and you've done nothing for me. Again, we've got two extremes. We may not be like the younger son. We may be more like the older brother. But we're probably somewhere in between, aren't we? And so is everybody else that walks on the face of the earth. But what we do is we have a God, we have a Father that's continually seeking us to be in fellowship with Him. One of the things that Yvonne starts our service with every Sunday morning is she pours the water for the baptism. She says, remember your baptism. You are a beloved child of God, right? And she's been trying to get us to do this in our greetings and all this stuff. Say to your friends, you're a beloved child of God. What Luke has done in chapter 15, he's told us that we're such a beloved child of God, that if you're 1 in 90, you're 1 in 100, if you're 1 in 10, if you're everybody, because we've got the two extremes, if you're everybody, you are a beloved child of God, and He is actively seeking a relationship with you. Well, let me tell you, in all deference to Dr. Schweitzer, I have never been able to capture the magic that I felt when I heard him talk about this scripture and the relationship of a loving Father to His children, especially those that don't always stay in the best frame of mind, when it comes to our relationship with God. But maybe as you have thought about this and as you've listened, that you've come across an acorn that you can use and benefit from. Let's have a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your scripture. We're thankful for our opportunity to come together in this church, to be in fellowship with one another. We pray, Lord, that you would show us how to be in relationship with you and how to be in relationship with our brother. And so when our brother comes in that it looks different from us or has different values from us or has different experiences from us, how do we love our brother and our sister the way that you love our brother and our sister? Show us that way. Help us as we go forward throughout the rest of this week. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now the one thing I'll tell you, I'm not done. You can't leave. As Jim said, I'm the president of the United Methodist Men this year, and it's been my privilege to be with that great group. One of the things, though, that being the president of the United Methodist Men is that I'm on the ad council. And one of the things that Yvonne has been doing the last few weeks is we've been doing kind of what she calls the scorecard. Do you see that in the bulletin? In fact, I've got the bulletin here. How are we doing? Well, 2 Sundays we talked about our youth ministry, right? And today we talked about our mission work. Well, the other third goal that we have is what about our senior adult ministries? What kind of work do we need to be doing as a congregation to meet the needs of our senior adults? Well, I volunteered to be on that subcommittee. Everybody was asked to be on one of the committees, and I was interested in that primarily because my parents live with us, and we moved them in about 5 years ago, And, you know, because I don't want to admit that I'm a senior adult now, even though I've been retired for 7 years. You know, I am senior adult, but you know, when you have your 88-year-old parents living with you, you can say, well, they're really senior adults. But you know, and what I've recognized the past 5 years is how different it is. I mean, I see my path before me as I watch my parents age, and my mom died last year. And you know, when you think about that particular stage of life, we recognize that we have different needs. And so my question to you, because I have this opportunity and I have another 5 minutes before I have to release you to go to church, is if our church could accomplish 3 things for our senior adults next year, what 3 things would be either the most impactful or the most doable? And I'm going to be asking other Sunday school classes that same question as well. I've been working on a survey. There's a ton of surveys out there for senior adults. I don't know how anybody would feel about filling out a 2.5-page survey with checks on it and stuff. But talk to me. If our church were to accomplish 3 things next year in the senior adult ministry section, what that would be meaningful to you, what would they be?
They already do one, and that's
What?
PALS.
PALS, okay. PALS would be good?
No, that's goes
That's
on
a-
down.
No, I know. Every Monday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's the constant, ongoing need of volunteers. And to say one thing is, a lot of our volunteers have come out of this class.
Sure.
So that's an ongoing thing that, you know, you never get to that healthy plateau.
Okay.
It's a challenge every week.
To get volunteers. Okay, so to have a more robust
Yeah.
mechanism to get volunteers?
Right, and we are aging.
No, not
Volunteers are aging. So we need some of that
Yeah.
newer.
as they come up. Yeah, I actually envision that at some point we're going to have a senior adult ministry. I mean, I think that's as important, especially in Georgetown. Holy smokes! You know, we live in Georgetown. I could see that could be a possibility, but we're not there yet. Bishop.
Well, I was going to let Jerry
Okay.
go down.
I was going to look at it a little differently. Rather than a specific activity, what are the needs that seniors have that aren't being adequately addressed?
Okay.
One of them is transportation. They can no longer drive, even though my mother was driving at 98 and I finally had to take the keys away.
Yeah.
So, transportation. Another one is they've lost, depending on their age, most of their friends.
Yep.
So they need activities that would bring them in contact with other people, both young, because that's an invigorating thing,
Oh, sure.
and older people. So contact with new people is important. And one of the most obvious needs that's not being addressed by our government adequately, or even private insurance, is meds. Whenever you go to Walmart or wherever you go, it's not infrequent that you see someone who comes up, maybe they're not elderly, but I'm trying to address it from an elderly standpoint, and they can't afford the meds they need. They've actually got to help them, and they turn away. So I would say a third major area, at least from my perspective, and there'll be others here who have others, is looking at the needs rather than a specific activity. And I would suggest that it might very well be another area for this church and this group to address are those people who just can't pay for the meds that they vitally need.
Actually, that's a good point. If I hadn't been so long-winded, I have this survey that has a bunch of those needs on there, and transportation is clearly one of them. Healthcare is another, although meds specifically weren't there. I'll need to add that. And so, but but that's right. I mean, the activities are meant to meet the needs. So my, maybe to rephrase the question more adequately is, if we were to accomplish three things, what three things would we accomplish that would best meet the needs? Because one of the things is I can think of a robust senior adult ministry plan for our church congregation, for this community, but we have to start somewhere. And so starting with something that's meaningful and doable is a good way to get momentum and moving forward. So I'm just asking for your feedback. Because one of the things we need to know is, what do we need to know? Yes, ma'am.
Joe,
Okay. Okay, yeah, sure. Well, this is a first. I'm probably, Zoe and I, are one of the few in our church who has a mother, my mother, who's over 100. She's 102. And I don't think the church has many of those persons of that age. I'm expressing only a unique picture of what her need would be. It is no longer socialization. It's no longer visits, because she has mobility problems, so she lives in her own home and has limited caregivers, and we're around her. But I think at that age, when you get to be over 100, and you know you're going to meet your maker soon, you need to have some affirmation of the worth of your life. And the affirmations often come from the community of faith. And in any way that you know that they can, she was 47 years director of the American Red Cross. Any way that the church could participate in affirming their 100+ members as people of worth and value, who still are considered loved and supported and appreciated from all of the years that they have lived and what they have contributed. And she's been a Methodist in the church all those years as well. So I would just say that as non-unique.
That's extremely important. I'll tell you what I wish I wish I hadn't taught anything, because I really wish we'd have been talking this whole time, because I think I would gain a whole lot more learning from you guys than our time. I only got 3 more minutes, so.
I think if we could do some data collecting of
Right.
addresses and find out where our various areas are of some who need rides, those who are more
Right.
aging
Very good.
and are not.
Good.
Stand up. He told me I had to stand up. My knees aren't working. What I feel we need to capture from our seniors is, I wish they would start writing their story. Once they're gone, their personal stories are gone.
That's right.
And I feel they have a whole lot to share. And this would tie into Joe, what he said about them having a purpose. And if there's some way we could start getting our seniors to write down their memories of things that have happened in their lives that are significant, or words of wisdom they would like to pass on to the next generation, we're going to lose it when they're gone.
That's a good point. I think about that, especially with that. Yes.
I'm very fortunate, as well as several of you are, living at the Wesleyan at Estrella. And they do an excellent job of making us feel important, making us feel welcome, giving us purpose, giving us something to do, interacting with each other. We have a little game called beanbag baseball. There's 60 or 70 people involved in playing beanbag baseball. Now, if you don't think that's a good mixer, older people need mixers.
I think there's a lot of opportunity for us as a church to do more with our senior adult ministry, and I know that the church wants to. Like I said, I'm only on ad council because of United Methodist Men, and when my term is up, somebody else will be taking my place. But the fact is I know that the church wants to do it, but we want to be sure that we're doing the right thing and the needed thing. I tell you, I think that I'm going to have to come back, or somebody's going to have to come back, because I need to hear more from you. We need to know a better idea, because one of the things is, like I said, I've been working on this survey for a couple of weeks now, and every time I look at it, I think this isn't very good. And the fact is first of all, if we ever do a survey, once it's done, it's done. And so we're only going to be able to use the data that we collect, and we got to be sure that we're collecting the right kind of information. And so we have to almost think this thing through to tell us that we are, and then we have to put into action plan what we're going to do to meet the needs. I have taken up all of my time. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.